Welcome back and welcome to the first technical session of the day. Thanks, Rajat, for organizing such a splendid conference. It gives me great pleasure to introduce today's speakers. It's, all three of them are distinguished in their own way. And we have a very nice mix of people whose domain is auction theory, market design, as well as people as well as practitioners from industry. So my name is Abhijit Banerjee, and I'm an associate professor at the Delhi School of Economics. So let me confess that I don't do any telecom auctions, but I do economics and I do some auctions. I do experimental lab auctions as well as data studies of various auctions, but not telecom. In the sequence that they will talk today, let me introduce today's speakers. So to my left is Professor Arunav Sen from the Indian Statistical Institute. Certainly to academics, I don't think he needs any introduction. He obtained his PhD from Princeton. He's a fellow of the very prestigious Econometric Society. So by way of comparison, maybe about 10% of the faculty at top 10 economics departments are fellows of the Econometric Society. We are very fortunate to have an academic of his standing practicing from India. He's also a recipient of the prestigious Infosys Prize in Social Sciences. So he will be our first speaker, and following him will be Mr. Rajat Mukherjee, who is the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer of Idea Cellular Limited. Okay, so he's asking me to spare the details, but nevertheless, let me just note that he has been with the company since its inception in late 1995. So he brings a lot of expertise as well as knowledge of how the industry has evolved in India. Finally, but certainly not the least, to my right is Mr. Parag Kaur, who is Vice President, Government Affairs of Qualcomm India and South Asia. And he has been the company's key regulatory and policy interface for the Indian subcontinent and the region since 2005. So let me just, without any ado, set out the rules for this session. The speakers will have about 20 minutes each to make their presentations. And following that, we will have a half an hour of questions and discussion with the audience, which can, address questions to whoever they like and take it up from there. So, Aruna? Okay. Yeah.
So, first of all, thank you, Rajat, and thank you, Abhijit. I must also echo the same confession and apology that Abhijit made. I'm not a telecom person, neither an engineer nor an industry expert. In fact, I barely know the name of my cell phone service provider. What I am is an economic theorist, who works on the theory of games. And, the particular aspect of game theory that I work on is called mechanism design. And that has a direct bearing on auction theory. And so my objective today, and I had Rajat's approval for this, so blame him, if you find this intolerable. Was to give you a brief sketch, a glimpse, if you will, of auction design theory. Let me say that it's an incredibly active area of research across various disciplines, certainly across economics, computer science, and even mathematics. So, from a technical point of view, it's very interesting. Also, it's also considered very important. There have been several Nobel Prizes in economics, for instance, at least how many? Perhaps 4 for work directly bearing on auctions, and another couple on work related to it. There are also, prizes, the important prizes in computer science, whatever, Turing Awards, Gödel prizes, etc., for work in this kind of area. So it's, it's very mainstream work, and I thought it might be useful to make some of you aware, of this work. So what I'm going to do is actually mainly talk about a very simple model which doesn't apply to telecom auctions, which is, forgot, I have to do this. Talk about auctioning a single good. We know in telecom that's not the case, and I'll have a few words to say about this at the end. So I'll talk about the single good problem, then I'll talk about the first price auction, the second price auction, talk about revenue, reserve prices, optimal auction design in the single good case. Then I'll say something about dynamic auctions and combinatorial auctions, which are really what is what applies to let's say spectrum auctions. Okay, so here we go. So imagine that there is a single good for sale. There are n prospective buyers. Since it's formal, n is greater than or equal to 1. So the critical assumption is that each buyer has a valuation for this good, but which is private information, which only this particular buyer knows, and nobody else knows, neither the auction designer nor other participants. Right? And the point is that if it was generally known, then, or if it was known to the auction designer, then the problem is trivial. Then the auction design problem is trivial, because what would the auction designer do? He would look around. I mean, if this valuation was stamped on their foreheads, you would simply look at the guy with the highest number and set that as the price. Right? And presumably the guy would, would buy it, perhaps at epsilon below that price. And all objectives are simultaneously achieved. But the problem is that valuations are known only to the to the potential buyers, and so they have to reveal them. And this process is the process of bidding. Okay, now it's typical to assume that the seller has some information, you might call it beliefs, about buyer valuation. And in the knowledge of mathematics or probability theory, the buyer has, knows the distribution of valuation. So you can think of the valuation as what's called a random variable, whose parameter, for instance, its distribution function, right? Well, I mean, don't worry too much about this, but, you might have some information, if you were the designer, that I don't know what the guy's valuation is, but it's somewhere between 100 and 200, okay, and equally distributed in that. So some information like that. Okay, so what's the commonest auction? This is the first price auction, and in the common English usage of the word auction, most people think of an auction as the first price sealed bid auction. But as I shall show, this is only one of an uncountable infinity of auctions. Okay, so what's the first price auction? All buyers submit bids simultaneously, or in ignorance of the knowledge of the bids of the other players, and the good is given to the highest bidder at the price she bids. Now, what's the first thing to realize here? That bidders are playing what's called a game of incomplete information. Why? What do I mean by that? Well, the problem of how to bid, right, is something which, while bidding, a player must consider what she believes others will bid, right? It says, you just can't, think about this problem in isolation, but and submit your bid. You have to have some idea of how the others will play. This is what's called a game. And typically, if you think about it for a minute, you're going to bid below your valuation. Why? Because, the good is of no good. If you don't get the good, then I mean, your payoff is zero unless you've paid some fees up front. So let's forget about that. It matters only if you get the good, right? And if you get the good, what's the price that you pay? The price is what you bid. So if you think that the next highest bid is going to be 50 and your valuation is 100, you're going to want to bid close to 50, a little bit above 50, so that you want to take a little bit of that surplus, right? So you clearly don't want to bid your valuation. And in fact, you can model this as a game, and if you compute what's called the equilibrium of the game, the Bayes-Nash equilibrium, some of you may have seen the film, what was it? A Beautiful Mind, about John Nash. So this is the Nash solution. You will generally bid some constant. I mean, there are some assumptions here. Let me not go into it. There are n bidders. It's n minus 1 over n vi. I'm assuming, making some assumptions. My point here is to show that you bid below your valuation, right, in equilibrium. And there is a notion of equilibrium which is, a little bit of controversy attached to it. But let's not talk about that. So this is the first price auction. You bid, the highest bidder wins the object and pays the price that she bids. What's a second price auction? This is called a Vickrey auction, and may I say that William Vickrey won the Nobel Prize for this idea in 1996. Sadly, he died in the interval between the announcement of his prize and his collecting the prize. But he, wrote an absolutely amazing set of papers on this in the early 60s. So here's the idea. All buyers submit bids. Good goes to the highest bidder, like in the first price auction. But the price that she pays is the second highest price. What's the second highest price? You remove the highest price. You remove the winning bidder's bid from the menu of bids, and then you pick the highest from what remains. Now, this seems like a crazy idea. Why do you want to, give a break to the guy who bids? Well, the point is that is kind of a subtle one. But the point is that in the second price bid, since the price is being set by the bid of some other bidder, it's, as far as you're concerned, that's fixed. You have a very strong incentive to bid your true valuation, right? So irrespective of what you believe others will bid, you cannot gain by not telling the truth. So in the language of game theory, you say that bidding a true valuation is a weakly dominant strategy. Although you're in a game, you really don't need to worry about how other people are going to bid. So if you were, for instance, bidding in a second price auction, and some guy came to you at night and said, look, I know how much the other bidders are going to bid. How much are you willing to pay me for this information? You'd say nothing, go away. I can't do better than by bidding my true valuation. If it was a first price auction, that information would be incredibly valuable to you. Okay, so let me give you a small illustration. Suppose a bidder's valuation is 100 and believes that the second highest bid will be below 100. We'll consider the other case in a minute. Say she believes that the second highest bid will be 80. So bidding truthfully, bidding 100, you'll get the object. How much is it worth to you? 100. How much are you paying for it? 80. What's your surplus? 20. Yeah, that's your payoff. Can you do better than this? Well, suppose you bid 150. Okay, you'll still get the good. How much will you pay? 80. What's going to be your surplus? Still 20. Right? How can you change your surplus? By bidding below. Right? What's the only thing you can do? Suppose you bid 85. Again, your surplus is 20. But suppose you bid below 80. Now you lose the object and you'll get a payoff of 0. So you have 20 versus 0. You can't win. You can't do better than by bidding truthfully. Now suppose you believe that the next highest bid is going to be above your valuation. That's 120. By bidding truthfully, you'll get 0. And if you bid high and try and get the object. When you get it, you'll be paying a price which is greater than your valuation. That is, you'll get a negative surplus. So again, it makes no sense for you to bid anything which is not your true valuation. Okay, so here's the question. You're the guy who's selling the object. You're interested in revenue. You want to raise as much money as you can. Will you organize a first price auction or a second price auction? Which does better? Now, the first thing to realize is that revenue here is a random variable. You know, its valuations are uncertain. I don't know what the real valuations are, right? So, you know, I can't predict exactly, right? It may depend. So here are two situations. Suppose the valuation of the bidders, suppose there are two bidders. Let's make it simple. There are two bidders. One bids 80. One has valuation 80, one has valuation 50. So what happens in the first price auction? If you recall that you're going to bid n minus 1 over n times vi, which if n is 2 is half of vi, so you'll bid half your valuation. So the bidders bid 40 and 25 respectively, and the revenue is 40 because that's what the high bid guy is bidding. And in the second price auctions, you will bid truthfully, so you'll get 80 and 50, and the high bidder and the guy who wins will pay 50, which is the second highest bid. So the second price does better. It's 50 versus 40. On the other hand, suppose the valuation of the bidders are 80 and 30, the two bidders, right? Then what are the first price bids in equilibrium? 40 and 15, and the revenue is 40. And in the second price auction, they'll bid 80 and 30, but you'll charge only 30 to the bidder, and therefore the first price auction does better. So it seems that there are some situations where the first price auction does better, and some situations where the second price auction is better. So can we say anything on average which is better? What is better in what we call expectation? And here is something remarkable. They're exactly the same. This is what Vickrey pointed out, right? Won him a Nobel. And this is part of a very general theorem in auction theory called the revenue equivalence theorem. And it's true not just for single good auctions, but multiple good auctions. It holds very generally. And the principle says the following, that two auctions that generate the same outcomes in equilibrium and where losers don't pay generate the same expected revenue. So what do I mean generating the same outcomes? Now notice that in the first price auction, both guys shade their bids down, but both of them shade them down in the same way. All the guys shade their bids down by the same constant fraction. So the highest bidder is still getting the object, right? So the highest bidder gets the object still in both the first price and the second price auction. So in equilibrium, the guy with the highest valuation is going to get the good. So the outcomes that they generate in terms of the allocation of the good is exactly the same in the first and second price auction. Okay, and losers don't pay, right? So there are no entry fees and stuff like that. Then they will generate the same expected revenue. Now this is kind of counterintuitive. And it actually seems that, you know, this kills off all questions about, you know, what can raise the what can raise higher revenue than than any old auction, right? It says that they're all going to give you the same in expectations. You can't predict which one will give you more in any particular circumstances, but if you average it out, it'll be the same. So here is the way you can do it. Here is the way you can do better. You can impose a reserve price, right? And is there a way? We introduce reserve price. We introduce a reserve price, and this may seem to be a bit paradoxical. Why is it paradoxical? Because all you're doing by imposing a reserve price is that you are increasing the chance of the good not being sold. Now the seller has no use for the object, right? By introducing a reserve price, you don't know what the valuations of the other guys are. There is an event where you don't sell the good, where everybody's valuation is below your reserve price. We are familiar with this event, right? If everybody's valuation is below the reserve price, then the good isn't sold. So how is it helping expected revenue? Well, it's helping for a very subtle reason, that there are situations, there are other events where imposing a reserve price will increase the price at which the good is sold if it is sold. So the probability of the good being sold is reduced, but the price at which the good is sold, when it is sold, may be higher. Okay? And this is when, for instance, in the second price auction, where if you have a reserve price, if the reserve price happens to be the second highest price. So you can think of the reserve price as the bid of the seller. The seller is also making a bid for the good, and you can just have a second price auction. Now, if it so happens that the bid of the seller is the second highest price, then you actually are raising the price at which the good is sold. Right? Now, that's the reason why you have that's the theoretical, that is an important theoretical reason for the reserve price, for introducing a reserve price. And it points to an interesting trade-off between efficiency and revenue maximization. What is efficiency, which is a standard economics notion of Pareto efficiency, right? That you can't make everyone better off. What is the efficient allocation here? The efficient allocation is to give the good to the guy with the highest valuation. That's what's efficiency here. It's as simple as that. And revenue maximization may be in conflict with efficiency, right? Because you're introducing the possibility that the good is not sold, in spite of the fact that you have that you personally as a seller have no valuation for the object. And here's another practical, consideration for reserve prices, which is that you prevent collusion. You can see that if a bunch of people get together and decide what prices to set, then you can, for instance, set the second price to be zero, right? Only one guy bids, and everybody else bids zero. So there's a massive amount of surplus, and then you just divvy it up amongst the other bidders. Okay, so let me just hurry on along. What is the revenue maximizing auction, right? And this appears to be a very difficult question, because I've just described sealed bid auctions. What about dynamic, auctions where prices rise or fall? What about them? Now, this is an important technical challenge, there are several technical tricks involved here. Basically, the idea is that you can represent any auction, dynamic or otherwise, has a sealed bid form, right? Has a particular way of representation mathematically. This is what's called the revelation principle. And then what you do is that you can write down an auction in the form of certain functions, and you impose certain constraints which are called incentive compatibility constraints, so that no bidder has an incentive to misreport her valuation, right? So this problem seems like an insanely hard problem, because there's an uncountable infinity of possible auctions and an uncountable infinity of constraints that each auction must satisfy. How in the world is one supposed to do it? And Roger Myerson in 1981 actually solved it, right? He solved it, and there's a very general solution which I'm not going to have the time to describe. I mean, I just had 3 points on it anyway. But here's the message. If all bidders are symmetric, right? For instance, they have the same, what do I mean by that? That all their parameters ex ante are the same, that your beliefs about their valuations in particular are all the same, then the revenue optimal auction